Hey guys, I've been out for the holidays, but I'm back. And today I want to talk about falafel. Now, falafel is one of those dishes that I've enjoyed for years, but I never thought I'd be making them at home. But since I started taking cooking classes, I thought, hey, why not give it a try? And I found out the recipe itself is relatively simple. It's actually quite easy, but on the other hand, it's just as easy to go wrong. So let's dig into the details and I'll explain. There are good authentic falafel recipe videos on YouTube, but what I found out when I tried it was that there are 5 details that are likely to trip you up as they did me. So let's go through those one by one. So the first thing that you'll wonder about is the actual size of the falafel, right? I'm assuming that most of the people who watch this video do not have a falafel maker at home. You can order that on Amazon, but it's fine. You can also shape them by hand. It's actually quite easy. But here's the issue. You're gonna wonder about the exact size of the falafel or the exact shape, because here's the thing. If you make the falafel balls too big, the outside will be crunchy and crispy, but the inside will be undercooked. It won't be cooked at all. It'll taste awful. It'll taste raw, actually. On the other hand, if you make them too small, the inside will be cooked, but the outside will not be crunchy at all, or vice versa. The inside will be overdone and the outside will be crunchy. So you're gonna wonder about what is the optimal size of the falafel balls. And when we do the cooking demonstration, I'll give you my measurements and you can work off of that. The exact temperature of the frying oil is something that really isn't discussed in a lot of these videos. And it relates to point number 1, which is how hot should the oil be so that the outside is crispy and there's enough heat to cook the inside. And at first I thought, hey, you know what? I want the outside to be crispy. So I raised the cooking oil to above 400 degrees Fahrenheit and it was not doable, right? The outside became burnt, it became almost black. And because of the high intensity and the short cooking time, the inside was actually kind of raw. So the temperature that I found works really well is about 350 degrees Fahrenheit. You want to keep the range between 350 and 385, I would say. I think that's the optimal temperature, which gives you a crispy outside, but you can keep the falafel batter in the oil long enough for the inside to cook. So the third question that you might wonder about is flour or no flour. Some of the falafel recipe videos use flour, some of them do not. So is there any kind of advantage to using them or disadvantages to using them? And what I found in my experimentation is that if you follow the proper methodology, right, you don't really need the flour, especially if you use, soaked dry chickpeas. On the other hand, it does go toward the taste. So if you want more of the kind of doughy, floury taste, right, obviously you add some flour. If you don't, if you want more of the kind of herby, natural taste, then go ahead and leave the flour out and it's fine. Okay, so question number 4. What is the proper amount of seasoning? So in some of these videos, they'll say add salt, add pepper, and so on and so forth. But they should talk about, seasoning it to taste, and that doesn't really work actually. So what I found out when I tried the recipes is that you want the herb mixture and the seasoning to be too intense. You want it to be extra salty because it needs to balance out with the ground up chickpeas. And so if you make them too salty to taste, then the final result will be much more balanced. Okay, so 5th and final question that you're likely to encounter, which is, and this goes to how the eventual falafel will taste. So in a falafel recipe, you've got ground up chickpeas and you've got the herb mixture with seasoning. And you're gonna probably wonder, well, how much of each portion should I put together in the final, when you fry the batter? And I've kind of experimented and I found out in general, and you can kind of start with this percentage and experiment to see which way you want to go. But I found if you keep the herbal portion of the recipe to about 30% of the total weight, right? And when we do the cooking demo, I'm gonna give you the percentage weight in grams for all the ingredients, so it'll be easy for you to see that happen. But if you keep it around 30% of the total weight of the recipe, you'll get a very good taste. So another thing to keep in mind. Okay, so here are the list of ingredients that you're going to need. Obviously, the most important thing is the chickpea beans, right? And I've had these soaking overnight for about 12 hours. That's really important. I think there is some confusion because a lot of the recipes call for dried chickpeas. So you might think, well, I take them out of the bag and I'm going to process them now. But then if you put them in water and soak them, are they really dry? No, they're not dry. But it is important that you soak them overnight so that they expand in volume and they're easier to process. You definitely don't want to try to make the falafel with straight out dried chickpeas. And a 12-hour soaking process is, I think, about the minimum that you would want, right? So have them soaked overnight and then, put them over a strainer and let them dry out. That's also important. Try to get out as much of the moisture as you can, but you can see here, they've been soaking and they've expanded to at least twice the size and they look ready for cooking. So the second most important ingredient is the Italian parsley. Italian parsley works really well. And this stuff right here, well, as well as the other stuff, is what gives falafel its green color, right? So, oh, sorry, I forgot. So I've got, for the chickpeas, I've got 220 grams of soaked chickpeas. For Italian parsley, I've got exactly 25 grams of the parsley. Next ingredient is the onion, and here I've got 40 grams, right? And like I was saying, when you take the whole recipe by weight, the chickpeas will be 220 grams, and so the rest of the ingredients, which is the parsley, onions, the mint, the basil leaves, the garlic, they should add up to about 30% by weight of the chickpeas. So we've got the Italian parsley, we've got the onions, we've got the basil leaves. I also add mint leaves. That's not exactly traditional, but there was a falafel shop in Anaheim, California that I used to go to all the time. And it was famous for their falafels. They were written up in the newspapers, and the owner said one of their secret ingredients is that they used mint. So I'm going to throw that in there. I think it tastes great. And so I have 9 grams of basil leaves and 10 grams of mint leaves. And of course, I'll have all these ingredients by weight in the video description below, so you don't have to memorize these. Also now, I have the garlic, and this is 15 grams, right? So the chickpeas were about 1 cup of beans, and for that, about four cloves of garlic is fine, and that came out to be 15 grams. I also add a little bit of ginger. Again, a non-traditional ingredient, but I like the taste of ginger, and I think it has a kind of mellowing out effect with respect to the garlic, and so I think it's a good addition. And also, we're going to add about 1.5 tablespoon of baking powder. It helps with the frying process and for the falafel batter to expand, Now, one last thing I wanted to note is that when I fry, I use avocado oil. And the reason I do that is because avocado oil has the highest smoke point, about 520 degrees Fahrenheit. And so you've got a wide range of temperatures that are available to you, for whatever you happen to be frying. So that's very helpful. And finally, I think you will definitely need one of these. If you don't have a spider, feel free to use whatever instrument you have, but I find these super useful when I'm frying anything, chicken, or in this case, falafel. You can dip them into the frying oil without hurting your hands or putting yourself at risk. And obviously, the spider drains out the oil very easily. So, all right, so that's a quick overview of the list of ingredients. And like I said, I'll have the ingredients by weight down below. And so let's move on to the part where we're going to combine all these ingredients into the food processor. And there's a particular step that you should go through to get the best result. So let's take a look at that now. In the previous video segment, I forgot to mention some of the spices and seasoning that we're going to use. So I'm going to do it now. Obviously, we have our salt, right? And I've got some coriander seeds and some pepper. And so the salt, the coriander seeds, and the pepper have been ground in my mortar and pestle. I love to use this thing because it really brings out the flavor of herbs and spices. I might do a video about why it's good to use this another time. But in any case, the reason why I put all these together and grind together is because I think it really helps with mixing the ingredients when we put that into the food processor, because the salt itself helps grind up the ingredients, okay? And in addition, I'm going to be putting in some smoked paprika and a little bit of cayenne pepper. And finally, another non-traditional, we already have, basil leaves as part of the ingredients, but I also like to sprinkle in some dried basil leaves to mix in. And with regards to the proportions, we're going to be putting in about between 1 tablespoon and 1 teaspoon, depending on your taste. So as you experiment with this recipe, I would suggest kind of fine-tuning the amount of spices and which kinds that you put in, and find out what works for you. Okay, so now that we've got that out of the way, let me move on to the next portion where we combine all these ingredients together and show you how that's done. When you get to this part of the recipe, you're probably going to be wondering, well, is there any particular steps that I should be taking? Is there any particular order in which I should put the ingredients? Do I dump it all together into the food processor, or do I do it in steps? And so what I've found is in order to get the best texture, the best consistency, what you want to do is grind up the herbs and the seasoning first and put the chickpeas in second and grind those up at that point, right? And the reason why this consistency and texture is so important is that when you're frying it, right, when you're making the falafel, you want to make sure that it's ground up enough so that it forms into a ball or whatever shape that you want. But you don't want it to be ground up so much that it falls apart in the frying oil, right? So I've actually had that happen to me, where the ingredients fell apart in the oil. And that was an important lesson to learn. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the herb into the food processor plus the seasoning, and then we'll grind that away. So it's probably a good idea, this is the parsley, to cut these up first, but I'm going to go ahead and just put them like this, and let's see what happens. Right? And this is the mint leaves, right? Let's put those in there. Okay, the basil leaves, right? Okay, put those away. And now we put in the onions. By the way, I didn't wash my hands, so I wash my hands like 10, 12 times when I'm cooking a particular dish. So I do practice good hygiene. Now, let's put in the seasoning. So like I said, I ground up salt, pepper, and coriander seeds into my mortar and pestle. And let's get, and each of those ingredients were about 1 tablespoon, right? So 1 tablespoon of salt, coriander seeds, and pepper, right? Now I'm gonna sprinkle on some cayenne pepper, and well, you know what? I'm not gonna measure it out exactly. I got my measuring cup, but I kind of know how much I want. But I would recommend starting with, this is kind of spicy, and I like it spicy, so starting out with maybe, you know, half a teaspoon of cayenne pepper, and go from there. And then some ground cumin. Of that, I'm gonna put in, let's see, I'm gonna put in, let's say, half a teaspoon. You know, it's got a pretty strong taste, so that should do it, right? And like I said, for no good reason, I'm going to sprinkle in some dried basil leaves as well. Why not? I like the taste. So, oh, before we forget, there's also the garlic. You know, you're supposed to mince these garlics as well, but I'm gonna go ahead and try it this way. You know, the food process should be able to handle it. And now I'm putting in the ginger. Again, a non-traditional ingredient, but I do like the taste. So let's close this up, and we're going to start with some slow pulses to get this all, you know, mixed together. So let's see how it goes. So as you know, process the food, you might be wondering, well, what's the exact texture that you need, you know, when do you know essentially that you're done? And so let's take a look, right? So, oops. These mishaps usually happen to me in the kitchen, especially when I'm filming, because it's so hard to pay attention to everything. But yeah, this is pretty much it, you know. So what you want is a kind of, let me see if I can put in okay, ground up herbs, but it's not by any means been reduced into a fine powder. That would make it impossible to fry the ingredients. So this is pretty good. This is pretty good. So what we did was we ground up the herbs first, right? And now we are going to put in our chickpeas. Okay, I'm going to do this by hand because I think it's a little bit easier. Okay. I'm trying to be, this is taking a while because I'm trying to be careful here. And of course, be careful with your fingers because those blades are sharp. And we're almost there. Okay, there we go. Okay, so let's put the lid back on and we'll pulse this a few times and take a look at the texture. Okay, so what do we have here? I knew it. Of course that's gonna happen. All right, so it's a good idea as you pulse this to kind of scrape the sides and mix it all around. As you can see, you know, I didn't really have to cut up the herbs and stuff, you know, because they all get ground together. It's probably a good idea to do it, proper technique in the kitchen to do it anyways, but looks like it's fine. I would like this texture to be a little bit more ground up. So let me give you a look at that, okay? So you can see that it's been sliced up, but not as finely as the the herbs, you can see that the chickpeas are still kind of in a little bit of rough pieces. So I'm going to continue on with the processing and hopefully not destroy my equipment. So give it a few more pulses. But we're almost there. We're almost there. Let's see what happens. And so I'm not sure if you can see the way it's being processed, but one way that you can know that we're getting close is that instead of the mixture all moving around together, right, they start to cling to the sides of the container. I don't know what this is called, but they start to cling, and that's when it becomes necessary for you to, okay, I'm gonna hold on to the top this time so it doesn't fall over. That's when it becomes necessary for you to, you know, to go in there and pat it down, and that's when you know we're getting very close to the texture and consistency that we want, okay? So I'm gonna give it a few more pulses. It's looking good already. It's looking very, very good. And so I would say that this part of the recipe is already a success, but I feel like giving it a few more pulses just to make sure. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so once again, you can see that the falafel batter is now clinging to the sides of the container. That is a very good sign. That means that it's working, right? And so you can see in this right here that it's clinging very strongly, very tightly to the wall. And let me give you an idea about the texture. So let me bring it to the camera. And the falafel, the chickpea beans have been ground up to a much smaller size. And you can see that the herbs and the beans are clinging together. And that's when you know that you're pretty much there, right? So this texture, I want to give you as good as a look as I can because this, the consistency is very important when we form the falafel balls. And so I think we're ready. We're ready to move on to the next step. So let's go ahead and form the falafel shapes, and then we'll move on to the frying part. Actually, before we get on to the frying part, this step is very crucial. I've taken the falafel batter out of the food processor, put them into a bowl, and you need to check for the right amount of seasoning, right? So like I said, when we put the herbs and the seasoning in the food processor in the beginning, we use proportions so that it's actually very salty and it's intense, and we want to check out the balance between the falafel beans and the seasoning. So what I do is at this point is I take a little portion of it and taste, right? And what I'm tasting right now is I can taste the herbs obviously, but also the spices, right? And the seasoning and the salt, and it's actually perfect. You know, if you like it saltier, if you like it spicier, I would use more than the ingredient proportions that I mentioned, but for me, this is perfect, right? And obviously, you know, if you want it, add a little bit more seasoning. The salt is there. Right here, you can all, at this point, what we're gonna do is we're gonna kind of knead the batter by hand. I don't think that's absolutely necessary, but it's fun. I like doing it. So, and then at this point, you can put in about 1 teaspoon of baking powder to help the dough fry. And then if you'd like to, you can add some flour. I think that rice flour works very well with falafel batter. So I already adjusted the seasoning, put in a little bit of flour, a little bit of, you know, thing, and just gone ahead and kind of knead the falafel dough. Like I said, I think this part is kind of fun. I mean, what's the point of making falafel if you're not going to kind of feel it in your hands, right? And after we kind of knead it and shape it, have fun with it, right? Then we're going to let this sit for about 30 minutes, let it rest, and then we'll move on to the frying portion. We've rested the falafel batter for about 30 minutes and we're ready to make the falafel balls. And like I said, at this point, you're going to be wondering what is the best size and shape. And for me, I like the falafel balls. You know, I assume, like I said, that most people who watch this video do not have the falafel maker, which is where they make, you know, little patties. I've always been enamored of the falafel ball shape. So that's what I'm doing here. I made one already. And so in terms of the actual size, I'm not sure if you can see this, but here, let me take a look. Let's call this about 1.5 inches, right? A little over 1.5 inches, but definitely not 2 inches. It's gonna vary in size, obviously, because you're making it by hand, and that's fine. You know, when people see irregular shapes, they actually know that you made this at home. It's fresh made, and that's a good thing. So if you stay within 1.5 inches in terms of the size, I think you'll be fine. And then you can go smaller, you can go larger, if that's to your liking, right? Excuse me. And one thing I want to mention is that if you decide that you do want to make larger falafel balls or other types of shapes, what you can do is you can take a fork and punch holes to the center of the falafel balls so that the oil can get inside and help cook the inside, right? So that's one way to take care of it. I prefer to make it around this size so that it won't even be necessary. And let me show you in terms of how I actually shape the falafel batter, right? So when you pick it up, it's gonna be a little bit crumbly, which is exactly what you want, right? And it's gonna feel a little bit loose. And so what you do is you kind of squeeze the batter by hand, not really worrying about whether it's a circular shape or not. And then there's moisture in the batter itself, which will help to form it and have it come together. And so just keep squeezing the batter until you feel the moisture kind of take over, right? And this one, I think it's a little bit larger than the one I made before. It happens, right? But as you squeeze it, the moisture is going to start coming out, being distributed throughout the batter, and it will help hold everything together. And that's pretty much it. There you go. That's reasonably round, right? Okay, and it's about the same size. So I'm gonna go ahead and make these falafel ball shapes, and then we'll come back. So this is about how much you can expect from, you know, the amount of ingredients that we used. I like the color of these falafels. This is actually my 4th batch, and I like the mix of yellow and green. The color looks really good. You will notice that I have some batter left over. And one thing I want to say about falafel batter is that it keeps really well, right? So don't worry about making too much because you can freeze it, right? You can take this, form into little balls or shapes, and like, for example, if this is too much, maybe you want to have 4, right? You can put the rest in a freezer bag, freeze it. It'll be easily good for at least a month, right? So that's the good thing about this dish. If you're looking for, you know, perhaps some vegan options in a week, you can pull this out of the freezer, defrost it, fry it up, and it's right there, okay? So I think we are finally ready to move on to the actual frying stage, and I'll show you how that goes. I've got my deep frying setup ready here, And I prefer to use a saucier pan, and the reason is because the side is curved. So when I'm scooping out the falafel or chicken breast or whatever it is, it makes it very easy. Now, some people have been asking about whether they should get one of those custom deep fryers. And my recommendation is no, because it is known that at high temperatures, their internal thermometer is actually rather inaccurate. And what I use instead for my setup is my beloved infrared thermometer. You get an instant read. I've checked it against the thermometers where you physically insert into the liquid or the meat, and there's hardly any variance. It's very, very accurate. And again, it's an instant read. So, as I was saying in my intro, the optimal temperature that you want for the frying oil is about 350 to 385 degrees Fahrenheit. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cover up the pan and bring the temperature up to the range that we want, and then we'll come back. We've got the oil heating up quite a bit, and I'm going to take a quick temperature reading. Very careful with the lid so you don't get spattered. And it's at 175. That's pretty much within the range that we want. And so we're going to go ahead and start frying these up. I'm going to do one at a time so that it's easier for you to see, but you can do 2, even 3. I found it was fine as long as you maintain the temperature, right? So we're going to do our first falafel. And these typically go for about 3 to 5 minutes, depending on how I feel about the color on the outside. And so I'm going to put these in, get them frying, and then we'll come back when about 3 minutes have passed, and you can take a look at what it looks like. Okay, so here we go. And of course, I've got my second plate ready with the napkins to absorb the oil. So here we go. So I'm gonna set the timer for about 3 minutes, and then let's come back after that. So I've had the timer going for about 2 minutes and 40 seconds, and I feel like the falafel is already pretty well done. Let's take a quick look at it. So here, I'm gonna shake the oil out and then bring it close so that you can take a look. See, that might be a little bit darker than I really want. It's because the falafel is a little bit smaller, but it's actually fine. The inside should be cooked very nicely. So I'm gonna put these away on the second plate, and at this point, I'm going to go through the frying process. I'm going to do 2 at a time because the oil has gotten hotter. It's actually closer to 400 degrees now, and it should be fine to do 2 batches of 2 at a time. So let me go ahead and do that, and then I'll show you the final product. You know, it has taken a lot longer to explain the whole recipe and the whole process than it is to make it. It's about 15, 20 minutes max, actually. Once you get into a rhythm, you know, you put the ingredients, you season it, put it through the food processor, fry it up. It's that easy, you know, other than, you know, the details that I mentioned. The first time, second time that you try it, you'll run into some hitches, which I've covered. And hopefully that'll help you to, you know, run more smoothly when you try it yourself. I like to have falafel with buffalo sauce. It might sound a little bit odd, but actually it tastes terrific that way. So let's give it a little sample taste here. And I'm going to show you the inside. Wow. That tastes terrific. Wow. Look at that. Look at that. Nice seasoning. It is really a nice crust on the outside. Inside is cooked. You got that nice, beautiful green color. And the sauce, believe me, it goes great with buffalo sauce. I actually made this for a holiday party recently, and it went over really well. So I'm gonna take another bite because I love this so much. Look at that. Okay, look at that. Wow, it tastes terrific. Wow. I'm gonna have another bite. There it is. Okay, so I know that's a lot of information to cover. It was a very detailed breakdown of how to make falafel, but now that I've done so, I think this is probably, if I do say so myself, I think this is the most detailed breakdown video about how to make falafels with all the little ins and outs. So there you go.